Good day. Star Trek. The very name is known to even the most normie of Normansteins. I'll give you an anecdote. Back in the primordial days of 2012, I was on a plane coming back to Houston, and I heard two normies talking about May the 4th, aka Star Wars Day, and one normie wondered if it was the one with Captain Kirk. That is how popular Star Trek the original series was and is. Over half a century has passed since the release of Star Trek the original series in the late 1960s. It was a show that changed the sci-fi landscape forever, where once sci-fi was rocket ships and doodads. Star Trek made it legitimate. Things in that show looked, if not real, then at least somewhat realistic. It predicted many of our modern advances and gave us a hopeful future to look forward to. Throughout the years, there have been numerous Star Trek shows, books, games, toys, and in 2009, there was an attempted rebooting of the original series that lasted all of 3 movies before people got tired of the mid-tier writing and the excessive lens flares. Then, Star Trek got a series that copied the reboot movie's aesthetics and writing style and features the adventures of an insufferable Mary Sue, and was purported to be in what is today called the Prime Timeline, but made sure to break canon as much as possible. By 2022, when Star Trek Strange New Worlds was released, Star Trek was in dire straits. The people who actually watched the bloody show had stopped watching because they were given crap. Crap that in many respects was actually worse than Disney Wars. Strange New Worlds is a spin-off to the crap Trek, but finally is written mostly like old Trek. Old Trek was popular in the past and today because it featured a cast of diverse and interesting characters that got involved into a bunch of cool adventures and explored the human condition. New Trek didn't have any of that. You got 1 or 2 Mary Sues that got involved in space explosions and plots so derivative they got sued by an indie game dev for plagiarism at one point. Strange New Worlds gives us a cast of diverse and interesting characters and plots that, while not wholly original, amount to more than dark, man, real life is bad, man, as was seen in New Trek. This show is purported to be set in the Prime Line, but despite it actually being good, it still breaks canon with the regularity of the crappy Trek shows. So I just imagine that it takes place in a different timeline entirely. And Season 2 backs me up on that one. Strange New Worlds is set during the 10-year time period before Star Trek the original series and features Captain Christopher Pike as the captain of the Enterprise. Captain Pike first appeared in the very first pilot of Star Trek the original series, way back in the 1960s, but that Pike was very different. He was a stoic commander that didn't take no crap and was humorless to a fault. The Pike in Strange New Worlds was introduced in the crappy Trek show called Star Trek Discovery, but S&W distances itself quite a bit from that abomination. Pike in Strange New Worlds is an affable, friendly captain who throws parties for his crew and is generally a friendly kind of guy. A bit too friendly at times, but he works and is believable as captain. The show primarily revolves around him, Spock, and a new character named La'an Noonien Singh. My Dreamweaver. And some side characters such as Number 1, aka Una Chin Riley, Ensign Uhura, Dr. Mabinga, Nurse Chapel, Ensign Ortegas, and to a much less extent, the epic chief engineer, Himmer. These characters are written pretty good, and the show does not go out of its way to present any one of these characters as more important or better than the others. The only issues with the show is that they all have tragic backstories. Every single one of them, each more tragic than the last. Someone on that writing staff had got to be playing some Mass Effect 2. Throughout Season 1, each has a personal demon that is affecting them in some way, and this will carry on to Season 2 as well. When the show starts up, Pike is reeling from events in that shit Trek show. In that show, he learned of his future, and in his future, he is exposed to some radiation and is left a quadriplegic that can only communicate through beeping. This concept was first seen in the original series episode, The Menagerie. Pike returned in that episode, but he was stuck in a life support chair. Can this version of Pike avoid that fate? Spock showed up in the Cage pilot with Captain Pike and was the only character carried forward to the mainline show, and is arguably one of the most popular characters in the entire franchise. In the original Trek, Spock was played as a smart, competent professional. Since those no longer exist in this grim nightmare future of the 2020s, Spock in Strange New World is portrayed as a nerd. Feck. but he does have his moments where he somewhat reminds me of the true Spork. Oh, Noonien sings. Some complain that she breaks canon because she has the same last name as a true Trek villain, Khan Noonien Singh, but I don't care. She is bloody hot. La'an is not the corporal-approved female character. Instead, she is tough, but vulnerable, and sometimes has to be bailed out by the evil males. She holds her own, but the show does not put her up on a pedestal. She suffers from trauma relating to a Gorn attack. Our intrepid side characters are Ensign Uhura. This is where she supposedly got her start, but prior to Strange New Worlds, it was never implied anywhere that she trained under Pike. But whatever, she's the fresh-faced newbie. She lacks the insulting awkwardness that writers think all young people have, most of the time at least, and she comes across as competent and intelligent, and the show does not Mary Sue her, most of the time. Una Chin Riley is criminally underused and disappears all the time. The original Una, aka Number 1, was very different in the pilot episode of Star Trek The Original Series. Basically, she did all the things that Spock did, and she showed up a whole lot more. In Strange New Worlds, she takes a backseat to Spock and stays there. One character we do get is kind of bland, sadly. Then we got Dr. Mabinga. He is a kindly doctor with a little edge to him. Nurse Chapel is the nymph character that is a little flighty and a little flirty but gets the job done. Ensign Ortega's, she flies the ship and is a cocky Han Solo kind of character, but is sadly underused. With that in mind, she is still a fun character all the same. Lastly, we got Chief Engineer Himmer, aka the cool dude. He ain't got time for your crap, but will be nice when needed. Also, very criminally underused. This season lasts a total of 10 episodes, and there are only 4 that are boring filler ones. The rest are pretty entertaining. Like old Trek, each episode is self-contained, and we got no two-parters or a myth arc to follow. However, we do get some character growth between episodes, and there is a good balance between explosions and character moments, and there are a few thought-provoking concepts in a couple episodes. One of the big problems with New Trek is that the pace of those shows never slowed down. What characters there were shallow shells spouting lame lines. Here, we got fully fleshed out people, and the show takes time to just have them chill with friends, and thus, when the explosions happen, we care about what happens to them. In Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, the audience was on the edge of their seat for a ship backing out. Character matters, and the writers of the show remarkably get that. While the show has problems all its own, it's still the best Trek we've had since 2005, and I highly recommend giving it a watch. Since that abominable Jar Jar Abrams Star Trek film, the aesthetic of Star Trek has been that of an Apple store with an ample supply of lens flares. The uniforms and ships and sets were all busy, techno-organic, pixelated garbage that should have been hauled away as garbage. Strange New World splits the difference. It has, at times, excessive detail, but it's way cleaner than the previous crap Trek tech vomit. And stuff actually looks like things. Whatever next. The uniforms are no longer that vomit-inducing blue color, but instead mimic those of the original series. Sadly, when a late 23rd century uniform shows up, it's not a uniform from that. Instead, it has fancy scales and all kinds of shit on it. Well, can't win them all. The Great Lady, the USS Enterprise, is pretty bloody sexy. It looks a great deal like the original Enterprise, and thankfully lacks that techno-organic crap from the Abrams film. The bridge looks good, but is a bit too big for how small the crew is, and yeah, the ship is supposed to be bigger than the true Enterprise, but it feels kind of empty most of the time, and you gotta wonder where everybody is. Back in the 60s, they had them corridors packed, and it made the audience feel like there was a shit ton of people on that ship. In Strange New Worlds, it's a bloody ghost ship most of the time. The VFX guys kind of cheat in one episode and have a ship based upon the Constitution class, but it is apparently smaller, because I guess work smarter, not harder, I guess. Still though, the show looks like Trek, and that is what matters, even if the interiors look oversized for what they are. So now, let's go episode by episode and see just what we got here. The first episode of Strange New Worlds is still tied to the previous crap Treks, and requires some knowledge of Star Trek in general. If you have no knowledge going in, you can still somewhat get the broad strokes of what is going on. The core plot of the pilot is that Pike has lost his mojo due to learning of his tragic future fate, and he has to get back on the Space Horse. And to do that, he has to go rescue the first officer of the Enterprise, Una Chin Riley. She went on a dumb mission to study a planet that has warp power, but shouldn't. She disappears, and Pike's gotta find her. All the characters kind of already know each other, or at least know of each other. This episode has some of the usual Trek plot beats. They gotta go down to the alien planet in disguise, although they don't just put on makeup this time, but instead get genetically engineered for some reason. whatever. It gives Spock a chance to freak out and blow their cover so we can have a punch-up. We get a silly scene where the Enterprise has to beam up some aliens to get genetic material, and one escapes, and there's a chase, and Uhura gets to show her language skills. We learn that the people of the alien planet figured out warp from studying a space battle that happened in the Shit Trek show. That makes sense, and somehow they make a warp bomb. Funny enough, that should be impossible. In a Star Trek novel called Federation, the entire plot of the novel revolves around a villain wanting a warp bomb, but its development is a dead end. In the end, Pike decides to let himself be taken to the planet's leader. The leader threatens him, but Pike calls down the Enterprise for intimidation points. Bigger stick indeed. So the planet has been at war forever, and Pike tries to broker a peace between them by offering them a place in the Federation. Because if they figured out warp, that lets them be good enough to be in a galactic federation, but whatever. They say they'll take it under advisement. As pilots go, it works. It's not boring or weird, just a workman episode that competently introduces the new characters and shows how they work together. Of the various Trek pilots, it's up there in terms of quality. The second episode is by far my favorite. The Enterprise finds a comet, and of course that comet is going to hit a planet filled with sentient people. This not being TNG, Pike wants to render aid. We got an A and B plot in this one. A plot is Pike dealing with some aliens that view the comet as sacred. The B plot is Spock and Uhura trying to deal with a weird artifact on the comet itself. The peril for the A plot is that the alien ship is very powerful, and the peril for the B plot is that Kirk's brother, of course, is on the Enterprise and gets wounded redshirt style. The episode starts strong with Uhura coming to the captain's table and getting ribbed a bit by the crew, and we get a very awesome scene with Himmer and Spock teasing Uhura. We learn a funny story about Pike, and that story is not just a throwaway time waster, and instead is referenced in the episode a few times. The aliens are cool, and they kind of turn the whole religious fanatic thing on its head, and ask Pike if he is a reasonable man, because to them the comet is sacred. It's perfectly reasonable to them, and to them, Pike is the crazy one. As you would expect, the Enterprise solves the problem of the week, and the comet doesn't get hit, and hilariously, and the aliens are like, yeah, told you the comet knew what it was doing, thus turning the usual religious dude bad thing on its head. Even better, it turns out the alien tech on the comet that the crew had to figure out somehow foresaw all the events in the episode. All told, my favorite of the entire bloody season. Third episode is the typical crew gets sick episode. It's in this one that we learn that Una Chin Riley is augmented, and that is a big no-no in both modern and classic Trek, cause Makan, Nooney, and Singh. A plot is Una Chin Riley trying to cure the crew, and B plot is Pike and Spock are trapped on an alien world, and energy ghosts are trying to kill them. It's a bit dull and a bit predictable, and it's not an episode that I will be revisiting all that much. Fourth episode is badass, as it features my babe, La'an. She was the survivor of a Gorn attack. Gorn in this continuity are not honorable lizardmen, but instead xenomorph-styled monsters, and the Enterprise gets attacked by a Gorn ship and is blasted pretty bad. La'an has to figure out their language in order to fight back. We learn in this episode that the Enterprise can survive being in a black hole. Yeah, that's actually not out of the realm of possibility, as the true Enterprise survived being in one in the Star Trek Federation novel. Damn, that book was good. B-plot of this episode is the old standby. Major characters are trapped, and they gotta stop something from getting exploded. And Uhura has to stop the explosion, cause Himmer is wounded. Both A and B plots come together in the end. La'an figures out the language and tricks a Gorn ship into destroying a small Gorn fighter craft that was kicking the crap out of the Enterprise. She also accepts her losses to the Gorn, and the exploding thing that Uhura has to stop exploding is used to fool the last Gorn into thinking that the Big E got blown up. All told, an emotional and exciting episode, and my second favorite of the season. Next episode is a Spock Must Be Mocked episode. In this modern Trek, the stoic Vulcan has got to be pantsed a few times, and this happens in this episode. So Spork in this continuity got together with a Vulcan named T'Pring, all the way back in the pilot. In the original Trek, Spock didn't meet her until way later. Well, she shows up here, and wackiness ensues. T'Pring wants to get closer to Spork, and thus they switch souls. Yeah, that happens mainly for a cheap joke of, uh-oh, they're in the wrong bodies, and wouldn't you know it, Spock has to convince an alien species to join the Federation. What are they gonna do now? This is one of the worst episodes in the season because of how lazy it is. Next episode is about as lazy. The next episode is about how the Enterprise has to escort a kid to a planet that just so happens to not be a part of the Federation. The kid is super smart, and the planet is apparently super advanced. Plot goes about like you'd expect. Kid gets kidnapped, and they gotta find him, rinse, repeat, surprise, Golden Throne! Turns out the villains were trying to save the kid from being put on the Golden Throne. The super awesome planet's central computer is controlled by the brain of a child, and he is put upon it, like the Golden Throne in 40K, to writhe in agony until he burns out and is replaced with another sacrifice. Yeah, you know, I think the Fetty boys are better even if less advanced. Next episode kicks the quality way back up. Pirates! Space pirates take over the Enterprise, and the villain of the week has the hots for Spock. How a bunch of pirates take over the Federation flagship, I have no idea, but let's just, suspend our disbelief for fun. The ending is so worth it. So the villain of the week wants a political prisoner released and took over the Enterprise so that Spock's life will do so. Convoluted, but whatever. Spock tries to pretend that he loves Chapel and not T'Pring, so that T'Pring won't release the prisoner. T'Pring buys into the ploy and tries to leave, but the villain ain't having it and decides to try and blast T'Pring, only for the villain to get locked out of the command functions. For you see, the crew and Captain Pike were transported to the villain's ship. Big mistake, because Captain Pike is a badass and took it over with his cooking! And thus the villain has to flee like a little bitch. The episode is summed up with Pike talking like a pirate. All told, my third favorite of the season. We got another filler though. In the grand tradition of episodes like Masks from TNG, or that weird Urquhart one from Enterprise, the crew gets turned into fantasy characters by a magical sapient nebula. Okay, so throughout the season, we had a side plot about Dr. M'Benga's daughter. His daughter has the space cancer, and thus she is kept in a transporter buffer, and this is a big secret. The writer got sick of this plot thread, and thus this entire episode was written to get rid of it. So the magical nebula turns the Enterprise into a cheap fantasy set, and the crew into cheap fantasy characters. I will say that Dreamweaver La'an looks sexy. The end of the episode is really creepy. The daughter leaves her human existence and joins the nebula in some sort of unholy amalgamation of human and gas cloud. Yeah, someone got paid to write that scheisse. Worst episode of the season, but still in the grand tradition of all true Trek crappy episodes. The next episode is a whole lot better. The Enterprise has to deliver some bullshit, and a small crew has to go investigate a distress call. And of course, when they go investigate that distress call, they cannot contact the Enterprise while they do so. That's gonna end well. The Gorn in this continuity are well and truly xenomorphs at this point. The ship Pike can go investigate has crash landed on an ice planet, and it's empty when they arrive. Turns out the ship picked up some survivors of a Gorn attack, and wouldn't you know it, surprise chest bursters! Red shirts get red-shirted, and Spock gets angry and kicks ass. The shit part of this episode, though, is Hemmer dies due to getting infected by Gorn facehugger goo. This is scheisse, as Hemmer never got enough time in the limelight. He was a good foil to the other characters, and had he had more time, he could have become just as iconic as the other chief engineers in Star Trek. But in modern shows, we gotta kill off the mains from my feels, man! Episode ends with my Dreamweaver leaving the ship to find Not Newt's parents. All told, it's a good one, but pisses me off because Hemmer dies. The final episode of the season is a Trek standby, the time travel episode. Future Pike goes back in time to warn past Pike that future bad and he must follow another continuity and become Wheelchair Pike. Future Pike is so adamant about this that he sends past Pike into the future. What we got here is a modern interpretation of the seminal TOS episode of Balance of Terror. In that episode, the Romulans attack Federation outposts in the neutral zone, and the Enterprise has to investigate. They find that a Romulan warbird can cloak, and that it is armed with plasmatorps. Damn, I love those things in the Star Trek Starfleet Command 2 and 3 games. In the end, Spock's dad, the Romulan commander, is defeated, and that kind of happens here, only not. Two ships get sent to investigate, and wouldn't you know it, the captain of the other ship is Quake! And cause since Pike didn't get turned into a wheelchair man, Kirk was not made captain of the Big E, but instead of another ship entirely. Also, this Kirk is played by a dick! Chris Pine's Kirk was closer to Shatner Kirk than this guy, and the show tries to make Kirk seem like a loose cannon, which he never was in true Trek. But thankfully, even though this happens, Kirk does not suffer from a character assassination. In this continuity, the Romulan commander does not get blown up, but instead heads back into Romulan space, and this somehow signals to Romulan High Command that the Fedi is ripe for the invading? Yeah, let's go with that. Kirk gets his time to shine when he uses a bunch of drone shifts to act as a diversion so the Enterprise can escape. But Spork gets brain blasted, and future Pike says that this happens no matter what. Sure it does, Pike. Just like how the Thanos snap was the only way. Oh, and Una Chin Riley gets arrested for being augmented. Happy endings all around. Shall I make a prophecy, ladies and gentlemen? Will all this unhappy shit be walked back in season 2? Am I right? Find out next review. I'm of two minds about this final episode. It's fine, a bit generic, but it makes me fear for the future of the series. The writers still have some pretension to being a legit prequel to the original series, but it goes so far out of bounds that it really cannot in any reasonable way fit in that continuity. So why not be subversive and have Pike escape his fate, and maybe team up with Kirk on a few occasions, or maybe be Kirk's boss? The sky's the limit, cause this ain't no prequel. For a season finale, it checks all the boxes. We got the cliffhanger that, while not great, does the job of making one want to see the next season. And so that is Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Truly the best Trek since the end of Enterprise. I would go as far to say that I like Strange New Worlds more than Star Trek Voyager, but not nearly as much as TNG, DS9, or Enterprise. It hits all the right boxes. We've got some cool characters, and yeah, there's missteps here and there, but for a season 1, man, they get a lot of stuff right. Star Trek TNG didn't get good until the 3rd season, Deep Space Nine the same way, and Enterprise, well, Enterprise had a strong first season, kind of, but it didn't hit its stride until its 4th season, and it got canned. The reality is, this show shows that modern shows can potentially be good if they focus on making a quality product instead of political crap. And so, I'm GeneralLotz, wishing you good Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and good Babylon 5, whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.